Okay, so I'm going to ask three quick questions and open it up for the group for Q&A as well. So first, before we were talking about the difference between wards and districts and how Westminster is unique in that. Talk to us a little bit about that, if you would, please.
Well, Westminster doesn't have a ward. We don't have a district. Again, we're 2 counties and 3 school districts. And it's amazing that we have never had them. Now, about 15 years ago, we did have a ballot measure that went on a local election to ask people if they wanted to convert from a totally at-large to a ward and district. That ballot measure failed about 4-1. Because regardless of who you call as an elected official in Westminster, that's your representative. There are 6 council members and the mayor, a total of 7. You call anybody, that's who you are represented by. We are unique, as Brian said. We're one of the few cities in the state of Colorado that doesn't have wards and districts. We've never had them, and I hope we never have them, because we require every elected official to be accountable to every member, resident, or business in the city. And we think it's worked out pretty well because nobody is off the hook. We also don't have the territorial or parochial disputes about, well, I need this for my district or I need this, because we're required to work as a body of 7 for everybody.
Love it. What is one of the greatest lessons you've learned in your 38 years of public service?
Why don't you ask something easy? I think that people are really in tune with what's going on around them. We don't take that for granted, but I also think that one of the biggest challenges that we have as elected officials is knowing when to stop talking and when to listen. And we talked about that a little bit earlier, but I think that's a skill you have to learn. Not everybody knows how to sit and listen. We talk a lot, but you not only have to listen, but you have to hear what the people are saying. So for me, that was a big change from being a person who was primarily in leadership roles before I became a council member, to learning that I've got to stop being the person doing all the talking, and I have to sit down and listen to what people are saying. And we do that through our community outreach programs. So we go in with no agenda, do about 5 or 6 of these throughout our community every year, and it's just there to have you tell us what you think, what's going on, what are we missing, because that's the best way to find out where your problems are.
And my last question, what would you like your legacy to be, your personal legacy?
Hopefully to leave Westminster better than what I found it when I moved into the city in the early 70s. I have a family there, I have children there, and I have grandchildren there. And when I leave office at 21, I got to figure out what I'm going to do. But whatever it is, when I started with the city, we were a small, much smaller city, about half the size, or actually less than half the size, and we're not done growing. But the biggest thing I want to leave with the city is that it is sustainable for the long term. We can afford to provide the utility service, the amenities we have, our open space, our parks, and an affordable community to live in. And I hope to leave that.
Let's open up to the group. What questions do you have? Yes.
At the beginning, you gave a projection for how big Colorado will grow in 2040. I was just curious, in the next 5 to 10 years, how big do you think Westminster will get?
So the question is, he gave a statistic at the beginning of how large Colorado is expected to grow by 2040, but specifically, what about Westminster?
Today, we're roughly about 115 to 117 today. I would say in the next 3 to 5 years, we could see as many as 10 to 15,000 added to the city. Am I any bigger than others? No. The influx that I talked about is so big, everybody's got the same problem. Where do I put them? Housing costs are driving a lot of that, but we will see a lot of growth.
What are the questions? Yes.
What about marijuana funds that come in? Is that controlled by the state, or where does that money go?
So the question is with regards to marijuana funds, one, where does the money go? And if it does go somewhere, does it go to Westminster in any way?
We don't have any
What?
marijuana.
But the funds from the state. You mean what the
We
state
don't-
is collecting in terms of taxes?
Okay, so I didn't know that. So you don't have any marijuana?
None
Sales.
whatsoever. No, we banned marijuana when it first came out as a city. That was the direction we had from our residents. We've never had it. What I will tell you is the bulk of the money that comes into the state from taxes from marijuana goes into what's called the BEST grant program. Now that was set up to fund schools. But BEST grants for any school district has to be met with matching funds. The smaller the district, the less the matching funds have to be. The bigger the district, give you an example, is Jefferson County. Second largest school district in the state. Can't qualify for grants because they have to come up with two mix for the match. So where does it go? Big part of it's still sitting in the bucket called best grants. So not a lot's coming into the cities. The cities or counties who have put their own tax on top of what the state has, they are collecting some. But how successful they've been on doing anything with it, I couldn't tell you.
It's really fascinating. Purnima first, and then Chuck. We'll work around to Christina. Purnima?
Honorable Mayor, great presentation. I wanted to ask you, you mentioned something about international business activities. Could you elaborate on that? And if you need a sister-city relationship or something of some kind, then perhaps that's something that I would like to know.
So,
If you don't have an international exposure, is there anything you need us to help you with?
So Purnima is the founder of the U.S.-India Chamber of Commerce. So her question is with regards to how much international investment and activity do you have in the city, and how could she be more helpful in that regard?
Do you speak Japanese?
No, I speak Indian.
Well, I have a large community in my area that are Sikh, and they are a lot of small business operations. Now, most of that is their funds, but we also have developers that are of the Sikh faith that are coming from outside the United States that are already engaged in a couple of development projects in the city. I've spent a good bit of time with several of our partners from outside the United States, the Consul General of Japan, Canada, and a couple of others. A lot with the Latino community groups that we have 5 Consul Generals from outside the United States from the Latin countries that are here, and they've been our guests on a number of occasions in Westminster, and we're trying to further develop from outside that. Colorado and the Denver market is just wide open for institutions and organizations and companies coming into Colorado. And it's not all from one area. They're from all over the world that are coming in. And we're seeing a lot of buildup in the metro area. Probably one of the biggest areas where I've seen development coming in for investment from outside the United States on the local level, actually Aurora. They have one of the biggest mixed pots of religion and groups that come in from outside. Those communities are very thriving. Ethiopia, all over the place. So it's very big here in Colorado.
Chuck, you had a question?
Couple things to say. Number one, I grew up in Arvada, so my son did go to Westminster High School. So would you please tell everybody where your light rail is at right now, so they know exactly what's happening?
Sure.
Is someone still in the old fire downtown Westminster?
So the question is, specifically, can you explain where the light rail is now?
Get out, whether they get off.
You get on, get off. Okay.
Okay. The only station on the B line, which is the last major line that RTD will build, starts at Denver Union Station and ends in Longmont. It is also the only rail line out of all of them that are being built that RTD did not own the right-of-way for. So when you leave Union Station, you come to Westminster, the very first station at 71st and Irving. That's the station, right next to Federal.
My other question to you would be this. Starting with the old city of Westminster, which is now calling 80th and Sheridan downtown Westminster, where obviously all that was there. Explain how Westminster has expanded its growth by annexing and growing. You are next to Stanley High School, you're actually going out around the whole city. You've really grown well.
So the question is, talk to us a little bit how Westminster has grown, specifically using the annexation process, and you've done a good job, but explain a little bit more about that.
All right, so our southern boundary is roughly about 58th Avenue in some portions down toward Arvada. So we're surrounded by Arvada, Denver, North Glen, Thornton, Broomfield. Yeah, I think that's all of them. So our easternmost border is I-25. Our westernmost border is Indiana. And north, you have to get up north of the Orchard, just a little bit south of Highway 7. So we're not a rectangle, we're not a box, we're not a circle. We're an odd shape. We're very long and kind of narrow. But we've been very fortunate. we're not at a point where we'll see much more annexation. What we'll see is some redevelopment. We'll see some private property that has not been annexed in the city, that's primarily in unincorporated Adams County. The only thing that's really accessible to us for any type of annexation to the west would be in Jefferson County, and that's right now is a nature preserve called Rocky Flats. So we go right up to Indiana right now. So there's just not a lot of growth on a horizontal. What we're going to grow is vertical.
Christina, you got a question?
Thank you, Mayor. Very interesting presentation. I retired from the mortgage business last fall after 36 years, and my specialty was first-time homebuyer down payment assistance. It still kind of pains me when I look at the barrier to home ownership for first-time buyers. Shortly after I retired, the median price of a house in the metro Denver area hit $500,000. Can go to Colorado Springs and it's about 240. What is the median house price in your Westminster area?
So Christina's question is, what is the median house price in Westminster compared to the average of the metro area of about $500,000?
I don't know that I can tell you the exact number for just Westminster. What I'll tell you in the metro area today is over $450,000 for a median price. And the Boulder area is probably closer to $1 million. But what I will try to answer is your cost of housing. Part of what's driven up the cost of housing here is the fact that we can't build condominiums. So construction litigation that was passed here in the state of Colorado several years ago, we've never been able to get it totally overturned. So there hasn't been, in just a little over 10 years, we haven't had a condominium project that's gone under construction that's below about $600,000 to $700,000 per unit. Now, if you're in that kind of an income level, you don't have too much of a worry about it. But what we don't have, and Westminster is a little unique in this, we've been able to move the state just a little bit to try to resolve part of that. Westminster and 18 other communities in the metro area passed ordinances within our city to encourage development of condominium projects, not only in the first-time home buyer market, but in the retirement community market as well, because people like myself, I want to move down eventually. But where do I move? I don't have the product there. The biggest impediment right now to getting condominiums under construction with the ordinances that we passed is not with the builders, not with the developers, it's with the insurance company. To look at a model today, and we've been working on this for several years, and talking to developers, it's about $20,000 per unit just for insurance to take care of potential construction litigation class action suits. Now, you can't file a class action suit in Westminster unless you have 51% of the ownership, not the renters, but the ownership, have to sign on to it, and you have to disclose up front what that potential litigation cost is going to be. Because what we have seen, the reverse of uninformed or uneducated people who, and I don't mean that they're stupid or not educated, that they don't understand the liabilities of being on a homeowners association board when they make a decision to go into a lawsuit over defect. If that lawsuit is filed, as a homeowner, you cannot refinance your unit. You cannot sell it. And if you lose the suit, your association's on the hook for the cost, which can run into hundreds of thousands of dollars. And if you're a fixed income, you probably can't pay the assessment that they're going to send you, so then the HOA turns around and files a lien on your property to pay for the assessment that you really had no voice in to start with. I know that doesn't totally answer your question, but it's the best I've got today. But we can't get there if we can't start getting units available for home ownership for the first-time home buyer and for the retirees to move down, and then that opens up the whole trickle-down effect of homes becoming available for those ready to move up from that first time.
Very true. Okay, Luke, and then we'll get to James.
Mr. Mayor, thank you for coming tonight.
Sure.
Of all the Front Range mayors, who's your favorite and why?
So the question is, of all the Front Range mayors, who's your favorite and why?
And it can be you.
I will ask you to take this with a grain of salt. The favorite mayor that I have worked with in my 30-plus years just passed away. Steve Hogan from Aurora. Steve and I have worked together when he was the executive director of the Highway Authority up in Broomfield. So I've known him and I've known his wife for over 25 years. And that was not only a professional loss, but a personal loss. I couldn't find a mayor that has served his community more than Steve had and took his community to heart to try to make it better when he left. And he did it with dignity. He left a community that is in good state. Bob Laguerre was just recently elected from the council to finish his term. And most of the stuff that he and Steve are working on will continue at least through 19. And then 19, they'll have to figure out a new mayor. But Steve Hogan was the guy to turn to in Colorado.
I bought a lot of vacant assets in Aurora, and a lot of it because it was Mayor Hogan. Personal friend as well, complete class act, absolute loss. Served his community well. Let's have one last question with James. And
So, on your comment about the cost of housing and the conversation, you mentioned a couple of times the workforce housing. That sounds, at least by name, like a template partial answer to that issue, and maybe part of the development issue as well. And that sounds like it ought to be something that's of interest to other communities throughout Colorado, particularly like big ski resorts. So my question is, what's the format? Is there an accepted format for that? Is it a federally funded project? Are there tax abatements associated, tax credits associated with it? How does that work, and how do you qualify if you're one of those members of the workforce? How do you qualify, and do you have to remain qualified? Maybe that's an awful lot of questions wrapped up.
Well,
I'm curious.
Okay.
so the question is with regards to workforce housing, putting more meat on the bone and defining it, but also who is eligible for it, and how can other communities potentially benefit from it to help solve the issue?
All right, so James, to your question, there's multiple answers. From the federal level, there are tax credits. 4% and 9% typically is what it is. Most people who go after those tax credits are builders who specialize in workforce affordable housing. Not every builder is willing to go through that process. It's typically about a 3 to 5 year process to get the tax credits even approved for your project. So this adds on to the normal development process. But that's not the only person who has to do the development investment. It has to be private as well. So a lot of your builders will build workforce housing, just like Coble and George Thorne are doing here, and they specialize in that type of a project. They have 9% tax credit on the one being built in Westminster, but they also have CHAFA, and they have some workforce support from us as a city. So we do things on tax rebates. We don't give them cash, but we rebate some of the costs for building permits, but what we don't rebate is water tap. We won't rebate that for anybody, because we still have to provide water and sewer. What you have is a very finite community. Now, Westminster is not alone in looking for that. Lakewood has a big project that they're trying to push forward for about 200 units at one of their rail stations for workforce housing. And I keep trying to move people away from affordable, because when we go into communities and we talk about affordable housing, people get the wrong connotation of what that means. They think people that can't afford housing. It's not really true. They can afford housing, just can't afford what it costs today. If you are qualified, it's income based. If you go into what's true workforce housing, it's income qualified depending upon the AMI for that particular project. Now, the one that was done by the Adams County Housing has people from 30% AMI to 80%. So there's a workforce base, there's an AMI that's set up for a municipality or county, depending on where you're at in there. Right now, let's say in what's today's Unison Housing, formerly Adams County, let's say in that part of Westminster, the average median income is $65,000, just pick a number. So in order to have that qualified, they have to be at least 30% or 50% up to 80% of that income is what they have to earn. And then their rent is based upon what they make. You go in and you can move up. AMI changes on an annual basis. So you can stay there from the time you enter, you can live there until you die, as long as your income doesn't exceed those. I think I answered most of it anyway.
Let's give the mayor a round of applause. Thank you.